Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to jump into this with you today because we're going to unpack a story from World War II that is incredibly high stakes, deeply fascinating, and honestly full of historical irony. We're looking at the history of the Ho-Chunk Code Talkers. Now, you've probably heard of the legendary Navajo Code Talkers in the Pacific, right? Well, the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin also provided a vital, completely impenetrable line of communication for the U.S. military. As you'll see, their story is an absolute masterclass in cryptography, historical resilience, and tactical genius.
To really wrap our heads around why this was such a game-changer, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a WW2 battlefield commander. You have a massive problem. How do you hide a message when the enemy is literally always listening? Because back then, this wasn't some fun theoretical puzzle. It was a daily life-or-death crisis. Remember, before computers and advanced digital encryption, military communication was terrifyingly vulnerable. It was an information war just as much as a physical one, and the side that could communicate its plans the fastest and keep them hidden had the ultimate advantage.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with the WW2 communication crisis, move on to the Ho-Chunk solution, then break down the mechanics of living encryption, look at a tragic historical irony, and finally talk about the memorial on I-90.
Starting right off with Section 1, the WWI communication crisis.
Think about the terrifying reality of radio transmission in the 1940s. German and Japanese intelligence units, they were phenomenal code breakers. So almost every single time an American radio operator keyed their mic, the enemy was probably listening in. And the consequences of those intercepted messages? Absolutely fatal. A cracked code meant true positions were instantly exposed. Ambushes were set up. Supply shortages were revealed to the enemy, and entire invasions could just fall apart. Seriously, a single decoded transmission about attack timing could flip the outcome of a battle and lead to devastating casualties. The U.S. desperately needed an unbreakable system.
Now, you might be thinking, didn't they already have codes? Well, yes, but what's really interesting here is how traditional encryption just completely failed the basic needs of a frantic battlefield. Machine encryption, like the famous Enigma machines, was just way too slow. You'd have to encode it, transmit it, and decode it on the other side. Codebooks were another option, but if the enemy captured your book, your entire communication network is toast. And human mathematical encoding was highly prone to errors, especially when you're under enemy fire. A single human slip-up could give an enemy codebreaker the pattern they needed. The military needed something lightning fast and totally secure.
Which brings us nicely to Section 2, the Ho-Chunk solution.
So military brass realized they needed a code that wasn't a machine, wasn't a book, and literally couldn't be reverse engineered with math. Their brilliant solution? Native American soldiers, specifically turning to the Ho-Chunk people of Wisconsin. Let's rattle off exactly why their language, Ho-Chunk, was a total nightmare for Axis codebreakers. First, it was largely unwritten at the time. Second, there were virtually zero fluent speakers outside of their specific communities. Third, it has complex nasal sounds, glottal stops, and tonal qualities that European ears just couldn't process. Fourth, the grammar is entirely different from English, packing massive amounts of meaning into these complex verb forms. And finally, Axis intelligence had dictionaries from major European languages, sure, but they had absolutely zero documentation on Ho-Chunk.
The result of all this was an impenetrable living shield. Even if an enemy intelligence officer perfectly intercepted a Ho-Chunk radio transmission, they had zero chance of understanding it. None. They couldn't look it up, they couldn't analyze the grammar, and they certainly weren't going to find a fluent speaker hanging around wartime Germany or Japan. Unlike a clunky mechanical machine, this encryption was immediate, it was completely portable, and it was utterly impossible to capture. Let's move to Section 3, Mechanics of Living Encryption, and see how this actually worked on the ground.
Picture a high-pressure 10-second battlefield scenario with bullets flying. A commander urgently needs backup. Step 1. He hands an English message to the code talker, something like, "Send reinforcements to Hill 300 at dawn." Step 2. The code talker processes that, instantly translates it, and speaks it in Hunkuk over the radio. Step 3. On the other side, the receiving code talker hears the Hunkuk, translates it instantly back into English, and hands it to his commander. Boom! That entire process happened in seconds. No math, no machines, just pure fluency and skill.
But, and this is a really critical detail that gets overlooked all the time, code talking wasn't just speaking another language. It actually required inventing a highly specialized, classified military vocabulary on the fly. I mean, think about it. In the 1940s, there were no traditional native words for modern weapons of war. right? Things like dive bombers, submarines, or heavy machine guns. These soldiers had to creatively invent a brilliant descriptive symbolic system from scratch.
Because so much of the exact Ho-Chunk wartime vocabulary was highly classified and barely documented, historians often look at the famous Navajo examples to show how this clever system worked. So a submarine, for instance, became an iron fish. A tank? That became a turtle. This meant that even if, by some absolute miracle, an enemy codebreaker managed to identify the language and translate the literal words, they still wouldn't have a clue what the military meaning was. It was literally a code hidden inside another code. Pure genius.
Now let's pivot to Section 4, a tragic historical irony. We have to talk about the deeper historical context here, because it is a jarring juxtaposition. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, U.S. government policy aggressively enforced assimilation. Native children were placed in boarding schools and strictly punished for speaking their indigenous languages. The whole goal was to replace Native culture with English-speaking American culture. And yet, when World War II breaks out, the United States military suddenly realizes these very same languages are strategically priceless, and they end up desperately relying on them for national survival.
This crucial, deeply ironic point was summarized perfectly by a Ho-Chunk representative who noted that, quote, the language that government policy once tried to erase became a weapon that protected American troops. It really highlights not just the vital importance of military intelligence, but the absolutely incredible resilience of the Ho-Chunk people. Their language survived decades of intense systemic pressure, and ultimately, that very survival saved American lives on the battlefield.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, the Memorial on I-90.
So how do we remember these heroes today? Well, the Department of Defense has officially recognized at least 14 Ho-Chunk World War II code talkers. Men with names like Bill Whitebear, Benjamin Winishik, and Donald Greengrass. When you consider the massive scale of the U.S. military during WW2, the fact that just 14 men provided such a highly specialized, unbreakable communications shield is incredibly rare. It's truly amazing.
But check out the timeline of their recognition, because this gap is just wild. During World War II, they served securely and in total secrecy. And because the military thought they might actually need to use these living codes again in the Cold War or future conflicts, the entire program was kept highly classified. It wasn't until 1968 that the Code Talker program was finally declassified. Tragically, that meant a lot of these veterans passed away without ever receiving public recognition for their heroism. In fact, it wasn't until very recently, culminating in 2025, that official memorial highway signs were even unveiled.
Which brings us to the I-90 Memorial Highway in western Wisconsin today. This specific corridor wasn't just picked out of a hat. The Ho-Chunk World War II Code Talkers Memorial Highway stretches right through ancestral Ho-Chunk homelands. It passes near communities like La Crosse and Tama, areas deeply, deeply tied to their history long before Wisconsin was even a state. By placing the memorial here, it physically grounds this massive piece of global military history right into traditional Ho-Chunk territory. It acts as a permanent, visible public history marker for every single person who drives past it. To conclude our explainer today, I want to leave you with a provocative question to reflect on. Why would a government try to erase a culture, only to later depend on it for survival? This story connects linguistics, warfare, and cultural survival in a way that very, very few historical events ever do. It proves that language isn't just about culture. It is about power, it's about strategy, and it's about resilience. The Ho-Chunk Code Talkers used their voice to create an unbreakable shield, and in doing so, they literally changed the course of history. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope this leaves you wanting to learn even more about the incredible history that's all around us.